coming. Our organization formed 18 years ago to preserve the 6th Street embankment, an abandoned or not in use rail line, and we're interested in repurposing it for rail, trail, and open space. We formed our organization 6 months before the High Line had their idea to transform their site in New York City. That project is now recognized around the world. Because of our unique situation, we are still defending and struggling to make the 6th Street embankment a world-class open space as well. But as we all know, it's not always easy to get people to do the right thing, even when it's in their own best interest. And that's why we have this climate change talk today. Please stop by our table and talk to our board members and our volunteers, and take the time to fill out this card, which is being sent back to the Surface Transportation Board, and will go a long way to helping us preserve the 6th Street embankment. We are happy to collaborate with Jersey City Parks Coalition. Our speaker today will describe how humans have added carbon to the atmosphere, warming the planet, and suggest ways we can mitigate these effects, including through landscape and habitat projects like the embankment. We have some nice examples from Rutgers and NJIT students what the embankment could be in the future. Laura Scolar is here, president of the Jersey City Parks Coalition. She'll tell you more about the initiative that they're taking on. Laura?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's so nice to see a full room on a beautiful sunny day. I'm glad you guys came in to hear about what we can do to combat climate change. The Jersey City Parks Coalition started in 2003. We are a collection of neighborhood and park groups that work to develop, renovate, and maintain our parks and public spaces. So you might say, well, where did the trees come in, aside from being in our parks? One of the things that we've always advocated for is for our volunteers and the children throughout our city to take stewardship of the park and public spaces. Back in 2011, our group, we had about, at the time, we had approximately 11 members at that time. And one of our park members, Charlene Berg, came up with an idea to do a citywide project called the Big Dig. And that project was met with great enthusiasm. As a matter of fact, it was met with such enthusiasm that the first year we earned the National Make a Difference Day Award in Washington, D.C. So we were recognized for our efforts. And at that time, we had only planted 18,000 bulbs throughout the city. That the project itself took place for the next 4 years. And the culmination was the planting of 238,000 bulbs throughout the city, using over 2,500 city residents and volunteers. So fast forward to 2015, and the Jersey City Environmental Commission did a tree canopy study, which was really quite disheartening because it showed that our city is only at 17% tree canopy when it really should be at about 40%. So the Parks Coalition said, well, you know what, with these 2,500 people and with a lot of interest in our environment and trees, why don't we harness that and do the bigger dig 2020? Let's do a 5-year initiative. We approached our mayor and the city council, and they were quite enthused about it. As a matter of fact, they said they would definitely partner with us, as did NJCU, as did Goldman Sachs, Dixon Advisory. So we have people that are behind us to get this done. One of the things, though, that's very important has to do with education. This spring, we actually partnered with the Jersey City Street Trees, Nick Millat, and our Bigger Dig 2020 partnered with him to form City of Trees. So what we're trying to do now and why you're here today is because it's not just about getting thousands of trees in the ground. We've actually upped the ante to put in 5,000 trees over the next 5 years. But it's not just about getting trees in the ground. It's really about the care and maintenance of those trees going forward. Because if people aren't there caring for the trees, then we have a lot of what we have today, which are empty tree pits and dead trees. So we'd like to welcome you here today. We'd like to welcome you to the City of Trees initiative and to join our JCTLC, the Jersey City Tree Lovers crew. And please be on the lookout for other wonderful education opportunities that we could all learn about our climate, our trees, and how to improve our neighborhoods and our world. So thanks. With that being said, I'd like to introduce Peter Delman. He's the treasurer of the Embankment Preservation Coalition.
Hi, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Dr. Baker. And I've known Jim for a very, very long time. He's my brother-in-law. He is also a Renaissance man. And maybe that sounds corny to say, but it is clearly true. Some highlights from his resume paint the picture. Visiting senior fellow at the London School of Economics, scientific advisor to Al Gore's Oscar-winning film, An Inconvenient Truth, Under Secretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere, and currently senior strategic advisor to the Clinton Foundation Global Climate Initiative. And that's just a sampling. Jim is an accomplished scientist, a talented musician, a craftsman who built his own banjo, then learned to play it. He is an avid traveler and is head of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. He was the master and commander of a fleet of ships. And Jim told me yesterday that he was also a rear admiral and in the admiral's book when he was in that position. Experiencing the world from such a diverse perspective helps Jim become an exemplary leader. And of his many qualities of leadership, the one I think of first is that he's an excellent listener. Many times I've seen his face light up with enthusiasm for someone else's story, someone else's contribution to a conversation. And you feel the warmth of his acknowledging of others as appreciation for what they have to say. As a scientist, Jim has tried to bridge the gap between complicated science and a layperson's need to understand. He had ample opportunity to practice this with our family. Most endearing to us, when he was in the Clinton administration, where he also served as U.S. Whaling Commissioner, he consulted with our then young teenage daughter on a dilemma of U.S. policy. Should the country support the tradition of Native American tribes and Norwegian fishermen to hunt endangered minke whales, or should it continue a protectionist policy for whales? Our daughter, who had recently, in sympathy for all living animals, adopted vegetarianism, and who was also indignant at our historical treatment of indigenous peoples, was the perfect consultant to understand the horns of this dilemma. I recollect she came down on the side of the whales as the more vulnerable group because they could not speak for themselves. If every person in a position of authority would try simply to listen as thoroughly and well as Jim did that day, our world would be a better place. We are now at a point in human history where we are all vulnerable to what noted scientist E.O. Wilson has said is the terrible demon of climate change, set to alter everything, everywhere. The most vulnerable are suffering its worst effects first, but we are all feeling them. We hope Jim will shed light on this subject for us non-scientists and inspire us to do our part in meeting the challenges of climate change. Jim.
Thanks. Thanks, Peter. Best introduction ever. Emily and I have been coming to Jersey City ever since, I think, 1978 with Peter and Maureen, and now with their family. And it's been just tremendous fun and impressive to see how the city has changed, and to look out over the waterfront and see the new buildings, and then now to see this wonderful set of new initiatives that really is making a difference in terms of both livability of the city and addressing these big challenges we have, as Peter said, about climate change. So I'd like to tell a story today about climate change and impacts, how climate change is driven by the choices that we make about energy and land use, and then some good news about energy, renewable energy, and projects to restore the landscape. I can't really talk about all of the issues associated with climate change, but this is sort of a sampling to give you an idea about why we are concerned and what's the news about the future. So let's just take a look at this. We know that climate is changing. We can see the impacts all around us. But we also know that people need energy to survive. And now humans have changed the atmosphere to get energy by burning fossil fuels. That turns out about the cheapest and easiest way to get energy. We can measure this. We can measure the change in the Earth's energy balance. Right now, because of the impact of fossil fuels, more energy is coming in than going out, and so the Earth is warming. What's the bottom line on this? We need to find new clean energy sources. We need to promote renewables. We need to find a way to slow the emissions of carbon dioxide and these greenhouse gases by protecting and restoring our landscape and forests. And we have to prepare for change. That is, we have to rebuild our infrastructure. This is the idea of seawalls to protect against high tides. I won't really have time to talk about the last part of this, but we can always talk about that afterwards. And then the exciting news is that this agreement between we had a signed agreement of 177 nations, and actually 195 nations agreed in Paris in December to really do something about it with the bottoms-up agreement, and I'll talk a little bit about how that works. But at the bottom of all of this is what we call the greenhouse effect. And let me show you how that works. Sunlight comes in, you can see there, I think I'll use sunlight is coming in, part of it gets reflected out, and then some of it is trapped. And the greenhouse gases add to the trapping effect. This is what's happening in the atmosphere. All these molecules, the CO2 molecules, are vibrating and absorbing energy, and the more of the CO2 molecules that we add, the more they vibrate, and they continue to do that, and this is what's happening. You can't see it, but it's what's happening in the atmosphere. We know this is happening. We understand the science of this very well. There is no denying the fact that this is something that's out there and happening. There we go. So what are the things that cause greenhouse gases? Well, almost everything we do. The industrial processes, agriculture, crops, industry, heating your house, charging your iPhone. Almost everything you do requires some energy, and all of these things at present cause an impact on the climate because of fossil fuel. If you look at the actual numbers, look over on the right, those are mostly things from energy, energy supply, transport, cars and planes and ships, heating residential and commercial buildings, and then creating iron and steel and all of the things that we do, cement in industry, those things all require energy. That's about 70% of our total impact on climate change with fossil fuels. And then the other 30%, forestry and agriculture, is not fossil fuels, but it's changing the landscape. So those are the two things that we'll talk about today. If we look at the correlation, we can see that, in fact, the global temperature has been rising. You can see in 1860 an average of about, you can see that little number over there, 56%. 56 degrees, and it's going up almost to 59 at this point. That's the temperature, the red and the blue, and the carbon dioxide rise is very consistent with that, and exactly what is predicted by the science. Not only does it warm, but the warm atmosphere also makes it easier for water vapor to evaporate, or for water to evaporate, so we have more water vapor in the atmosphere. More water vapor in the atmosphere means stronger storms. And if you have watched that, in fact, over the past 10 to 20 years, storms have more water, even locally. You can see that in many places. So this is obviously an issue with dealing with infrastructure, and it's something, you can just refer back to my end of my talk about the embankment. Something the embankment is good for, storing water. So that's important to remember. Go the other way here. So let's do that film. The temperature has been increasing, but it doesn't increase steadily, and it doesn't increase the same amount in every part of the world. So it's really important to look at this. This is over since 1895 or so to 2012. You can see it is getting warmer, but it is not in any way a smooth process. And this is one of the difficulties of really trying to understand climate change, is when we predict, we're predicting into the future when there's a lot of variability. It's a trend on top of variability. This is an important point to remember. Go back here. But we do know that as we add CO2, the temperature is going to get warmer. In fact, this is what our models say right now. Temperature forecast, you can see the kind of dark red is between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius, which is like between 3.5 degrees or 7 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a major change, particularly in countries that are vulnerable. And it gets warmer in the Arctic for various well understood reasons. So this is what we're looking for at our future if we don't reduce the emissions of fossil fuels, the greenhouse gases. Now, it's not just a question of having a warmer world, but also we get more extremes. Normally, we would expect, let's take the summer temperatures in 1951 to 1980. If you distribute these out on a graph, there's some cold ones, there's some warm ones, there's a mean, and there is a nice bell curve with the mean in the middle. You know, sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's cold. And this is the way that we generally make decisions about infrastructure. You go back, look at the last 30 years, and what were the temperatures? How did it vary? And then let's make sure that our infrastructure and we're prepared for that. But the problem is that with something added, with a new trend, the whole system moves to the right. So here's what happens. Now we have, in a warmer world, not only is the mean, the temperature, the average temperature is more, but the extremes are more. So you have more hot days. Actually, you have fewer cool days in the summer, but you have more hot days, more extreme temperature events, more heat waves. And I think you may remember the big heat wave in Europe just 3 or 4 years ago that killed a number of people in France. The extreme temperature events, as it says there, used to cover 0.1%. Now they cover 10% of the Earth. And this is not a model, this is just data that's collected from looking at the temperatures in the Earth. So it's not only warming, but we're getting more extremes. Now I'll show some examples of this. For example, here's a super typhoon Haiyan, which hit the Philippines in 2013. The reason, or one of the major reasons that this was such a strong storm was because it went over very, very warm, anonymously warm, abnormally warm temperatures in the Pacific and got a lot of strength. The hurricanes derive their strength from the warm water below and then hit the Philippines. The same was true with Katrina, by the way. That Katrina went over Florida. It was not that bad. It was bad, but it was not that bad. But then it gained a lot of strength as it went over warm water in the Gulf of Mexico. Then it hit New Orleans. As it gets warmer in the north, wildfires are more likely. You probably just read about this recently, this big wildfire near Fort McMurray, Canada. 200,000 acres, 100,000 people displaced, still not back home. And it was especially bad, not only because of the warming general warming that we get, but also because there's an El Nino going on, and that makes it warmer in that part of the world. And the early spring and the El Nino combined made it warm and dry. Big wildfire. That was a huge problem. So you have the wildfires. Then you have sea level rise, and you saw this really magnified with Superstorm Sandy. But this is what we'd expect in Miami by the end of the year, a 5-foot rise with current emissions levels. And there's some pictures of Miami Beach. Every year they get some bad flooding. They call it a king tide. But now you get flooding in Miami on most high tides. And yet the state of Florida still refuses to use the word climate change in any official document. But the people in Miami don't really agree with that, and you can see the high tides. And you've seen some of those high tide issues here in Jersey City too. We see the same thing throughout Europe, floods in Central Europe, and here's big droughts in China. As I said, a warmer atmosphere holds more water vapor, so the storms are wetter, you get more floods. But because that water is concentrated in the storms, you get more droughts. So maybe that seems contrary, but in fact, the climate change is leading to more floods, more droughts, more extremes. But not only that, here's an example. I won't show the movie just for a second, but this is a picture of the jet stream, which meanders around the Earth, and it's driven by the fact that it's colder at the pole and warmer at the equator, and so that temperature difference drives a jet stream that goes around. The jet stream meanders, but a bit. But now, with a warmer pole, there is less temperature difference between the pole and the equator, and so the jet stream can meander more. So let's see that movie. And you can watch the jet stream as the Earth turns now and puts the U.S. more in the middle. You can start to see some of the kinds of meanders. Here's one that brings some cold air now, but now see this deep one here? That really deep one, that brings cold polar air. You can see it again right there. Cold polar air from Canada down into the U.S. And that was the cause of the big winter about 2.5 years ago that you could see. Let's just run that once again. I think it's really nice. That's a period of about, I think it's about 1 month time frame. But there you can see the jet stream moving around. This is one of the problems that we have, and one of the reasons that we have difficulty in forecasting what's going to happen, because the atmosphere is variable. There you can see that big loop right there. The atmosphere is variable, and the variability tends to get moved around, but then when you say, I'm going to predict what's going to happen, that's more difficult. So we do better at predicting trends than we do specific events, as the weatherman likes to say. So all of this warming and floods and droughts all lead to a whole variety of different health impacts. We do expect to have more grains of pollen in the atmosphere. A wetter atmosphere is a happier environment for pollen, but there's a whole set of things. Malaria, diarrhea, various tropical diseases moving north. Insects, all this is not human health, but insects are happier as it goes further north. There's a big problem with forests, for example. So there's a whole set of health issues. I could give a talk on just that subject. So as we look overall at natural disasters, the insurance companies are particularly involved because they have to pay for these things, and they want to know what are the facts, what has been happening. As they make these kinds of graphs, natural disaster trends, this is from Munich Re, which is one of the really big group reinsurance companies. And you can see as you plot that, we've got meteorological events in green, climatological events in orange. You're just seeing a lot more. And so the insurance companies are asking, how can we make sure that this we can be prepared for it, and then what are we going to do about it? This is the other large insurance company, and this is what they say, what keeps us up at night is climate change. We see the long-term effect of climate change on society, and it really frightens us. Well, if it frightens the big insurance companies, it ought to frighten us. Let's face it. So what is driving this, and why is it so hard to solve? Well, one of the reasons is that we are, as I said at the beginning, we're getting our energy from burning fossil fuels. The reason we do that is it's fairly easy to do. We can get coal and oil and natural gas by simply taking it out of the earth, and it's relatively cheap, and there are a lot of supplies. And this has traditionally been the way that we get energy and that we use it. And if we look at the global carbon emissions from fossil fuels back to 1850, the Industrial Revolution has really driven the whole use of energy and the need for fossil fuels. But it's not just the Industrial Revolution, but it's a growing population. And particularly in developing countries, as those countries grow rapidly and try to improve their standard of living, they need sources of energy. And the cheap, easy source to get right now is coal and oil. And that's what they do. That's what India and China have been doing, although there is change. And that's one of the things I wanted to briefly talk about. If you look now to the future, you look at the increase in global energy consumption, what do we think is going to happen? The fact is half of the growth of energy use is going to be in India and China. And in fact, if you look at India, over the next, up to 2030, so that's over the next 15 years, there will be 1 million new Indians reaching the age of 18 every year. So this is a huge impact of new people, all of whom need energy to live, survive, have their standard of living, and to do all the things that you need to live a happy life. And so how do you find energy for the developing countries and for us in the developed world? That's really a big question. We have a limit. We can't keep adding carbon to the atmosphere, because if we do, we're going to reach temperatures that are going to cause us to have a world that's not livable. The current belief is if we could keep below a 2-degree increase by the end of this century, 2100, that would be a good goal. Some people say the goal should be even lower, and they may be right. But if you look at that goal, we can only add 1,000 billion tons more to the atmosphere, and we're currently adding 35 billion tons per year. So you just need to divide those two numbers, and you get 28 years. So after 28 years, we've added that, unless we can cut way back on the numbers. And so we need to take action now to cut back on the numbers. Actually, we should have taken action a long time ago, but that's like, as Emily and I are driving along the street, and I'll say to her, "You should have turned back there." Well, yeah. So how do you deal with these things? Countries have been trying to come together under the United Nations for a number of years now, and to see if they couldn't reach agreement. And they have been doing this now for 21 years. So we just had this past year in Paris the 21st Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and actually, for the first time, actually reached an agreement. It's not necessarily going to solve all of the problems, but it was an important. I went backwards, didn't I? It's an important step to reach agreement. So the goal was that the nations were trying to agree on keep the global temperature down to 2 degrees Celsius. That's just a little less than 4 degrees Fahrenheit by the year 2100. But what was new and different, and why we should think something is actually going to come out of this, is because every nation will submit its own plans to be monitored and verified, and then they'll publicly report every 5 years. So they never did this before. It's a bottoms-up plan. You submit a plan, it has to be verified, and then we'll see how it adds up. Well, how does it add up? Because each of the nations did submit a tentative plan, and if you add up all the things that the nations did, we're about halfway there. So the question is, how can nations do as much as they have already promised to do. Now, this includes both reducing emissions and adapting, which I'm not going to be able to go into, but that's another important point. Well, this is an important picture. This is the 195 nations that signed the agreement, and most nations that ever signed any international agreement, ever. And so that in itself is amazing. The one that is next is the Law of the Sea Agreement. So the United States is 1 for 2 on these two. But we have nations agreeing that they are going to produce their plans, and they're agreed to have that monitored. We were there, and it was a really fascinating event managed by the French. There was a lot of security because there had been an event earlier in Paris. The venues were set up to make it easy for the delegates to get together. There was a lot of food, a lot of different kinds of restaurants, which is typically French style, and I think that probably helped groups reach agreement. Plus, the Paris police decided that they would relax the rules on demonstrations, and so they allowed some large demonstrations to take place. You can see that one there near the Eiffel Tower. So it was, it had been set up in a way that I think really was conducive to reaching an agreement. And I'm pleased to say the US and China and India were all very important players in making that happen. But there was another really important, maybe even more important meeting in Paris at the same time. This is development of what's called mission innovation, which is trying to, what they say, accelerate the clean energy revolution. $20 billion of venture capital was committed by Bill Gates and others to help develop clean energy. The idea being that governments under mission innovation would support the idea of research and development that's required, and then the private sector would put up the venture capital to really put these new renewable energy programs in place. So here's what we have at this point. After the Paris Agreement, it was agreed that the next step would be for nations to ratify the agreement. And so in New York on Earth Day, 22nd of April this year, 177 nations ratified. That is, they signed and said, here are our plans, ratified the Paris Agreement. Now the hard work begins of trying to make that happen. And a big piece of that will be, what are we doing in renewable energy, and what are we doing to help protect landscapes? So let me just go back to this graph, and just to remind you, it's about 70% of our emissions come from energy supply, transport, residential, commercial buildings, and then 30% from forestry and agriculture. And I want you to be thinking about where can I contribute to that? So let's look at this. There's been huge advances in wind and solar. And the cost of solar is coming down, and wind establishments are being put up. They're not necessarily the greatest looking things. Some people like the modern look. Other people feel it's not great for the landscape. But there are trade-offs as we try to find new ways of providing energy. We have to figure out how to do this. What's, I think, most interesting right now, and this is the good news point to take home, the energy capacity growth by sector as estimated by Bloomberg. You can see here, this is 2016 here, going out to, it's 2040 at the end. You can see the yellow, as you might guess, is solar. Projected to be huge growth in solar, and also in the other hydropower and wind. These are all areas of tremendous growth, great places for jobs for young people, and a great opportunity for us to really change our energy infrastructure. One of the things that has happened as a consequence of that is that the cost of solar panels, you can see this cost right here, this is the cost of solar panels, has now dropped below the cost of providing the same energy by oil. It's dropped below, and that's really the most important thing, maybe the most important graph. because if you can get to that cost point, then people are going to say, well, I'm going to buy the cheaper one. I know this is one thing I would say. You know, we're seeing a lot of growth. You're also reading at the same time about solar companies that are going bust. And you know, that happens too. But you're talking about a kind of a wild west of opportunity here, where there's going to be a lot of good things are going to happen, and other people are going to overreach. This is all part of new development. Right now, this idea of trying to deal with carbon has reached out around the world. Countries with carbon policies, there's more than 30 countries at this point. New energy generation in the US, there is more renewable than non-renewable at this point. In 2014, you can see the first half, there was more geothermal biomass, wind and solar than there was natural gas, and even in 2015, 2016, first half 2016. Same thing is true. This is all new stuff that is happening. It's a great place to be. If you're not in the renewable energy world, maybe you ought to be. This is where the opportunities are, where the growth is. Renewable energy policies by state. We have many states already have their policies in place. And then we have to remember at the same time, while we are thinking about that we are still using a lot of fossil fuels. The growth is high in the energy world, but we're still using, more than half of our energy generation is coming from coal and oil and natural gas. And so these are all putting CO2 into the atmosphere. And so we have to remember that not only do we have to find ways of producing renewable energy, but we're going to have more CO2 in the atmosphere. So there is going to be some change. So let's look at this question, not of energy, but I think it's a good story about energy. Let's look at the question of the other 30%, the forests and landscapes. What can we do to restore landscapes, and how can we really make a difference there? Well, globally, there's a huge opportunity. This is put out by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. In the green areas, this is not forest. This is degraded land that could be restored. So there's about 500 million hectares, that's over 1 million acres, of land that could be restored if we got communities and groups, you know, big farms, small communities, a whole variety of things. If you look at India, for example, there's a huge opportunity in India. If India restored all of the land that is currently degraded, it could match the emissions from all of its fossil fuels. It could be carbon neutral, simply by planting trees and bushes. This is not rocket science. This is really simple, but it's difficult, as you all know, to make a community project work and do something different from what you've done before. But this is one of the things where there's a lot of efforts. One thing we in the Clinton Foundation have been involved with, but it's something that really can make a difference. This is the driver, and you know, we hear a lot. If you read this literature, you hear about the desire to invent a machine that would suck up CO2 and put out oxygen, and that would be that could work. And there are a number of companies trying to develop machines, but this is actually a machine that does that, and it just has to be planted. That's it. Trees take in, because of photosynthesis, they take in carbon dioxide, and they release oxygen, and about half of it, you may think that more of that, about half of it, 40% or so, goes into the trunk, but then 45% goes out through the roots, and as the roots decay, they become soil organic matter. 45% of the CO2 that comes in a tree goes into the soil, and then 1% is in the leaves. So you can see that a tree is really a wonderfully efficient thing to do, and the nice thing is, you know, either you protect or you regrow. We've been involved in both in the work that we've done at the foundation. We've helped the country of Guyana, a small country just north of Brazil in South America. A beautiful, pristine rainforest, about 85 to 90% covered, and we've helped them develop the technology they need. A little closer, yeah. Okay, they've helped them develop the technology they need so that they could avoid the deforestation, protect their forest. They're big problem is gold mining, interestingly enough, as the Chinese come in to do more gold mining. I was down in the jungle in Guyana talking to the foresters there and asking them about the gold mining question. And I said, what do you think is going to happen as there's more gold mining? And they said, we don't have any idea because the country of China owns most of the gold mining concessions in Guyana. And so they make the decision about what they're doing. Well, that's another lecture about distribution of natural resources. But in fact, with modern technology, you can see what's happening with these very accurate satellites. You can see what's happening with gold mining. You can point that out to the authorities, and they can try and do something. So we worked on a forest protection area here, and then. We've also done, on the other side, working with a country that is actually less forested than Jersey City. Kenya is hoping to increase its forest cover from about 6% up to 10%. Kenya is on the east coast of Africa, key element of the East Africa economic group there. And have been rapidly growing. And so my picture shows that rapid growth in Nairobi, for example. Some of the new technology that we've talked about for allowing the people to identify trees and to see what is actually there. And then we've been working on providing the technology to make maps of what is there, so that the government just moved from having 9 provinces to 47 new counties. So they have 47 new governors, each of which is facing all the problems that you're talking about here in Jersey City. And they want information. And so we're trying to help them meet that within their development priorities, because one of their big issues is poverty, hunger, and trying to rebuild. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening closer to home. Climate change is affecting New Jersey winemaking, and I'll show a picture of that in a second. I'll show a picture of the what we think things looked like in 1609, and then we'll talk a little bit about each of the Jersey City initiatives here. So for the New Jersey winemaking, there are New Jersey. It's called the Garden State. You're all familiar with that. And there are still parts that are Garden State, but I think Maureen pointed out to me that by 2030, the whole state will be built out. You're threatened by rising sea level. So there's some good things like the winemaking that is benefiting by warmer temperatures, but you can't be complacent, as we saw from Superstorm Sandy. Now let's look at several projects in Jersey City, and there's a lot of information around the table here and experts here. This is Manhattan in 1609, the Wallachia project. You can see a bit of Jersey City and Liberty State Park there, and in fact it was Henry Hudson landed at the Jersey City Newport Mall. No one-way streets to worry about at that point. But here, let's look for a minute at the Harsimus Branch embankment. I love this program. It's not just because Maureen and Peter are my sister and brother-in-law, but it's a perfect example of how to work in a community and address climate change and local issues. Because you can save energy, you can store carbon, and you can retain stormwater, and you can help reduce sewage outflows. It's a grassroots project involving thousands of people. They've been working on it for 18 years, and hopefully in the next couple of years, the right things will happen. I understand the fate of this may be decided this year, possibly. But so the more people that are involved in trying to make this happen, turning that railroad corridor into something that goes all the way across the city, and you can see the wonderful maps that are laid out there. I think I've got a picture of that. It's a picture of the people involved, the maps, and what the embankment looks like there. Then the Crossroad Trails is another really exciting initiative. The idea is trying to find an urban answer to the Appalachian Trail. So a couple of downtown residents have put this idea together. Some parts are in place now. And you can see in the picture there's a downtown over the lower left, and in the middle is an abandoned rail bridge, and then there's a segment of the Bergen Arches over to the right down below. So it's a really wonderful idea of trying to pull this together. And you can see on this map, this once you've got all the trails there in Jersey City, and this would allow city residents to be within 10 minutes walk of an off-road route to get to where you want to go. So it's another, the Crossroad Trail is another really good example of trying to live with nature within the city here. Now let's do this video.
Trees create vibrant communities. They soften the concrete around us, they filter the air, they collect stormwater. Jersey City street trees and the Jersey City Parks Coalition have merged to form the City of Trees. We are increasing the number from 2,020 trees to 5,000 trees over the next 5 years.
So we look at the New Jersey, Jersey City land cover at 14%, heading for, as was pointed out, hoping to get closer to the 40% line. The coalition is the umbrella for parks organizations all over the city, and since 2011 has been involved with the Big Dig, planting tulips and daffodils, but now working with the city to plant 5,000 trees. And then the Big Dig is moved into the City of Trees here. So please join. So what can I do is a question you're going to ask yourself. Are these things left to the nations who meet in big meetings in Paris, and now Marrakesh is going to be the next one? Well, there's a lot of things you can do, and I think the group here, the assembled group, has been very effective in number one, organizing. And to the extent that you can change laws, this, I think, is very important. You may have seen recently in paper this suit that has been brought on the behalf of young children against the government because the government is doing those things that will affect them later. I think that's a very good way to get attention to these issues. I think using social media is really, really effective, and it's a way to get people involved. The more you can tweet or use other social media, the better to get the word out about how you can make a difference. And then joining organizations committing to solve the climate crisis is something you can do. As sort of on a practical level, there's a number of things, every day, every day or, during every day, you make that decision. Should I turn out a light when I leave a room? If you go to Europe, typically the lights go out when you leave a hallway. If you're in America, the lights never go out. And this has been true for a long time. So there's a lot of things we can do just for energy efficiency. You can put insulation in your home. You can avoid food waste. You can drive an electric car. And you can have your home use solar panels to get heat. There's a lot of energy coming down from the sun, which is cheap, and there's a lot of different ways in which you can put this together. Think about it. It's really the goal of a talk like this, or for bringing a group like this, is to make you think more about how every individual decision you make every day about how you use energy and what you do. And maybe you're not even thinking about how you do it, but you're having an effect. And because you're in a big, powerful country that uses lots of energy, every decision has an even bigger impact. And so you need to think about it, you need to get your kids to think about it, and then change your behavior. So all of those things are really critical. And what to keep in mind is that, let's have the movie, cue the movie. This is a picture of Earth from space, from a spacecraft that was heading off on its real mission to Jupiter, the Galileo spacecraft. It took the first moving pictures of Earth in space. This is one day of life on Earth. We have a very fragile, small planet with a thin atmosphere. Let's do the movie once again. And we have to find a way to protect. And I think what is important is that we're all involved. So thank you for coming. Thanks you for being involved with this. And either now or afterwards, I'd be happy to answer questions.